So Odin's Game is the first in a series of novels set in the early 10th century. It's historical fiction, and it's in the Norse world, primarily in the Norse world. But Odin's Game tells the story of a young Icelandic boy, he's about 17 years old, who has grown up in Iceland not knowing who his father is. Now, in Iceland, to this day, that's quite important because you're named after your father. So you would be, I don't know what your dad's name is, so your dad's called Bob. You'd be Ruadh Bobson. But your sister would have a different surname. She'd be Susan, Bob's daughter. So Einarr, who's the hero of the book, he doesn't know who his father is, and his mother is a mysterious Irish woman who has a lot of money and owns a farm. Will never talk about who his father is. Unfortunately, his temper gets him into problems with the local, what's called a Godi, who's a chieftain effectively, and he ends up exiled from Iceland, and it sparks off an adventure where he goes to seek the truth about his father and learns who he is, and unfortunately there's not a happy family reunion at the end of it. And he travels to sort of all around the Irish Sea, Norse Gaelic world. He goes to Orkney, goes to Dublin, Norse Dublin, where he meets a Norse-Irish princess called Afreka. Afreka, actually, to be honest, is more of a Norman name, but it's the Norman version, more pronounceable version of Offreth, which was the original Norse name. So he meets her, and then he also falls in with a bunch of very dangerous warriors who are called Ulfrednar, wolf cloaks. They were a certain type of berserker who were dedicated to the god Odin, and they seem to have been slightly less nutty than the traditional violent berserker, but no less dangerous. And they work for King Eirik Bloodaxe of Norway. So eventually he basically gets embroiled in the politics of the Irish Sea, where kings and kings and earls and jarls are all struggling for domination of the very lucrative trade routes of the Irish Sea, which is the Whale Road, and it's like a game for them, but hence the title Odin's Game. I do try to be as historically accurate as possible. So there are historical figures in the story. So, for instance, the Jarl of Orkney is a man called Thorfinn Hoffelskjalf. I can't even pronounce it myself. Basically, he's called the Skull Splitter today, yeah. But if you, I call him the Skull Cleaver because it's actually Hassel Klaufer. The Norse word is Klaufer, which is where we get cleaver from. So he was real. Eirik Bloodaxe was real. The Guthrith of Dublin was real. Ironically, we know more about Viking Dublin in 941 than we do about Orkney, because the Norse historical sources aren't really historical. They're Icelandic sagas, which were written in the later medieval period. So it's based on as accurate historical events as I can discern. There is a bit of a grey mist over some of those times. Athelstan's in it.
Oh.
So obviously he exists. And it's around sort of events like later in the series. There's events like the Battle of Brunn, etc. The Vikings did come here. At the end of the first book, there's a bit of a raid on an island here. It's actually Coney Island, not this one. But this one's interesting because it's Oxford Island, which it has a Norse name to this day. Oxford comes from Ostfjordur, which sort of like could be East Fjord, or more likely like Oxman's town outside Dublin. We call them the Vikings, but those people called themselves the Ostmen because they came from the east. It means the east men from the east. So yeah, there's a sort of a pivotal moment in the action where the wolf warriors have to essentially assault a heavily armed island here in the dark, which must have been terrifying because, as I said, the Ulfrandar, one of the theories about them is that they're the origin of the legend of the werewolf, because they would attack you in the middle of the night screaming like wild animals with these wolf cloaks on over their armour. So it must have been a really nice experience, to be honest.
Video, Linda.
This is Northern Ireland. You know, it's all right in the middle of one entity, if you like. But in 840, that was a separate kingdom to that, with a different king and who didn't get on. So you could come here and attack them, and these guys wouldn't do anything about it, sort of thing. So it's an old story. Ireland for you. Originally, I wrote it as one tale with a start, a middle, and an end, and then I got a deal from Aria, and they wanted me to write 5 books. So the end of the first book, I know how it ends because it's already written. The end of the first book is now the end of the 5th book. I'm on the 3rd. I've got the 3rd one done. But how the 4th one and the 5th one get to there is still up. It's actually a good point, that, because it's not just the length of time, the scope of any tale about the Vikings is huge, because they had even here, Dublin, massive slave market in Dublin, but it was actually at the end of a huge trade route that goes right across the railroad, that goes right across the northern seas from Iceland, connects Dublin to Iceland, to the Faroe Islands, to Norway, to Hedeby in Denmark, and all across that whole wide variety. You know, they went as far as Constantinople, Spain. The scope's there to really. In terms of things that they haven't done before, I mean, no one's really written about 10th century Iceland. So just writing about that is kind of, I hope, avoiding the cliche. or 10th century Dublin, you know. So, if anyone, this is going to make me look really dated now, but the 2 leaders of the of the wolf coats. The leader, the skipper, is called Ulrich, and he's a small, balding, wiry little guy who's really annoying. And he's actually based on Lars Ulrich from Metallica. And his sidekick is Scarpethan, who's a big, tall, blonde-haired lout, and he's James Hetfield.
If Dave Mustaine is coming in the
There's no Dave Mustaine in it. Afreka is she's actually kind of a culmination of just some of the literary heroines I've really respected in the past. I did go for the standard blonde-haired Valkyrie type, which you're going to see in Vikings and things like that. But hopefully she's got a sense of humour, which there's the one thing I do like about a lot of Norse stuff is everyone's unrelentingly grim and serious and macho in them. Whereas if you read a lot of old Norse sagas and things, the first thing that comes across is really intense black humour.
The fart jokes.
Yes, there's actually someone called Eystein Fart. That's a historical figure, and I'm determined to get him into one of the books. I start to research this stuff. More and more stuff comes to light, and like fascinating facts that you didn't know about, and really gruesome stuff as well. It's always good. I was reading yesterday about they found a skull fragment in Denmark that has some prayer to Odin on it, but it had a hole drilled through it. So someone was wearing this, or had nailed it up to the wall or something. It's just. Yeah, it's different. That's what I'd say. It's not your standard macho Viking tale, and it's actually based. So I had a review. So one of the nicest reviews was that they said they'd never read anything that seemed to be so authentic in terms of Norse culture, and I think that is different because I haven't gone down the standard route. There's as you know when you're writing historical fiction, there's a what people expect and think the past was like and what it actually was like, which are actually almost different, and it's quite risky, I think, sometimes to go the other way and stick to to try and be as accurate as possible. I remember it was Amanda Scott said about she found that in Roman Britain there were pelicans, but would you really put that in the book? Because readers would go, hang on, there's no pelicans in Britain, because there aren't any today. And then it kind of would jar them out of the suspension of disbelief, I guess. So yeah, hopefully it's a lot more authentic than a lot of other tales of that time, and hopefully it's a lot more exciting. Sorry, that's a digression. But he had this essentially whoops.
Malfunction.
Sorry.
Wardrobe malfunction.
Fight to the death in a wrestling match. Who was
A weasel.